You know, one of the joys of being a teacher is torturing students. You will always be writing in here. So, what's next? Now that you've finished the profile essay, we're going to move on to the technology narrative. It's a good one to move towards because it's going to be largely based on experiences you've already had. If you're worried about how well you're fitting into academic writing, how well you're adopting, working off of stuff you already know is going to be a good thing. So, what do? I'm glad you asked. Essay number 2 is an essay that focuses on technology. And technology is one of these big words that can mean pretty much anything. Technology is the study of or the use of tools. So technically, we could do a technology paper talking about rocks and the wheel. But we're going to do it a bit more contemporary and the kind of technology you expect we're talking about when you talk about technology. Educational technology and computerized technology. But first, before we get into that, I want you to imagine that instead of being in a college classroom where we meet over the internet and chat and you watch videos, we were in an actual, honest, normal classroom. But 70 years ago. Be quite different, wouldn't it? As an aside, you notice that almost all the men are wearing ties. You also notice that there are very few, if any, minorities. It's kind of hard to tell in this picture. But let's not focus on those such issues. What I want to focus on is how your daily experience of going to college would be different. Well, first off, you would have to actually go to the college to register for your classes. You certainly couldn't do it over your phone. When you were looking for the college, you'd have to have a map, and you'd probably have to write out directions. GPS is one of these things we really take it for granted. But isn't it marvelous that we might never be lost as long as we have battery life? Cool. You'd go in your paper, you certainly wouldn't type. You go into your classroom, you certainly wouldn't type your notes. You'd handwrite everything. And you would have to have your papers typed when it came time to do a paper, but you wouldn't have a computer, so you'd have to find the typewriter lab. Now, think about how you write papers and how much different it would be if you had to write it on a typewriter. If you mess up something, you could just go back and change it. If you were doing it on a typewriter, you'd either have to go through loads and loads of whiteout, or you'd have to rip up the paper and start again. If you decided that you needed to move a paragraph around, you'd have to rip up the paper and start again. If you had to revise, you'd have to rip up the paper and start again. Then you would have to bring an actual paper copy into class and hope it didn't get lost. You certainly wouldn't be able to meet in an online chat room to talk to your professor about it. You'd have to line up outside of their office, and they'd probably only be available like 5 hours a week. That's a real big change right there. Then when you got to the end of the semester, you would have to wait for a piece of paper to be mailed to you to tell you your grades. As a teacher, I wouldn't have, there's a lot of things I wouldn't have. I would have to handwrite all my comments. I wouldn't be able to just shove pictures up. You would be pretty much reliant on my chalk drawing skills. We could go on, but technology really changes a lot of things, and it's hard to realize because we're so immersed in the technology. We don't really have an escape from it, and we take it for granted as a result. Now, this leads us to the technology narrative. 3-page paper, 75 points. Digital technology is the specific focus, plays a role in many parts of our life, not the least of which is education. For this essay, you will write a personal narrative about how some technology has influenced how you learn and especially how you write. You have two options available for completing the assignment. Either one, write about how computers or some other technology, handheld devices, apps, digital publications, social media platforms, so on and so forth, how and perhaps where and why alters how you write. You might consider where and how you first encountered this technology, your efforts to learn it, how it affected the way you write and the way you learn, your first reactions to it, and how your use of it has changed over time. Concentrate on a few key experiences over the course of your experience with this technology. Conclude with a summary view of why it is significant for you, or no longer is. So, starting with the specific piece of technology. Or you can start with an experience that changed the way you use and think about digital technology in relation to academic work, especially writing. Could be your first experience with new technology, a time when you learned a new use for an existing technology, an assignment that showed you new uses for technology in your schoolwork, a time when you recognized the limitations of a certain technology, or a time when you struggled but finally mastered a technology. Keep this specific. If you do the second option where you're starting about an event, go to something limited in time. The first time I wrote on a word processor is much better than my senior year, or even my senior year computer class, or everything I used my Chromebook for. Same way if you're doing the first option where you're focusing on the technology first, saying phone is way, way too broad because telephones for the last 10 years have had more power than we used to send people to the moon. They're computers. A program? Sure. An app? Yeah, why not? The camera? Okay. The assignment is a personal narrative. You will write in the first person. Describe your experiences as concretely as possible using vivid descriptions of settings, devices, people, and other elements of your story. Besides describing what happened, interpret its importance. What did you learn from the event, and what parts of it led you towards that understanding? And I would even say that while this is a personal narrative, it is going to be a really good idea to frame the explicit parts of the argument, like the thesis statement, the topic sentences, focused on your argument. Yeah, first person is fine all the way throughout it. But the ability to manipulate paragraphs in my word processor has changed the way I think about drafting and that it's done blah, blah, blah. And then my experiences can all be first person, but you can imagine the paragraph. Computer technology gives the possibility of revising as you go, that kind of thing. So let me tell you a little bit about how technology has played a role in what I do. First and foremost, I went to a community college out of high school. Then I took a summer off after I got my 2-year degree, and about 3.5 years later, I went back to school. When you take that long of a break, you take school a lot more seriously. Also because I was paying for the whole thing. And I knew I wanted to stay in school. I liked education when I finally got to do good education. My high school sucked, but college was fine. And I knew that I wanted to pursue it farther, but I didn't really have a good understanding of how to do it. I thought all you would have to do is get great grades. And I did. I graduated with honors, magna cum laude. I applied for about 9 or 10 places. The only place that accepted me was University of Alabama, Birmingham. I was living in Florida. I didn't really see this as being a massive step up. So I just decided to stay where I was. But I thought that if I was going to go on and get a PhD, I needed to do more than just get good grades. So I did any number of things. I became a graduate assistant for the department. It was a drastically different time. That's all I can say. But one of the things that happened to me when I was a graduate assistant is I was talking to one of my professors who just started his own literary journal. And he said that he was lining up funding and he was looking up subscriptions and how he could get people to subscribe to his journal. And he went to our campus library and they said, we can't do it. He's like, but I teach here. It's like, if we take yours, we're going to have to dump something we already have. We don't have any money. And he thought, why don't I just do it online? That stuck with me a little bit because I also didn't have any money. I couldn't make a grand gestures and do stuff from scratch. But computers were around and I was fairly knowledgeable at them for the time. So I decided since I thought I was going to get a literature degree, I decided that I was going to start an online journal myself. We kept it going for 7 years and like 12 issues, I think. Yeah, the design is very horrible, but this was 1996 design as well. There's a lot of ways I progressed in my skills. But doing this, becoming a graduate assistant, going above and beyond the call in a few different ways got me into a doctoral program where just simply getting good grades wouldn't. The technology allowed me to do stuff that students even 10 years before wouldn't be able to do. And that got me noticed. When I started teaching, I got my doctorate from Bowling Green in culture studies. And I graduated in 2003, and I part-time taught for 2 years. At Bowling Green, they had computers in every classroom, and I got used to using them. I was also part-time teaching at University in Toledo, and I swear up until like 2008, I had classrooms that had overhead projectors. I don't know if you've ever had an overhead projector. I'm assuming they've probably been way obsolete for a long time, but yeah, up until like 12 or 13 years ago, I had to use overhead projectors at times. The ability to pull up a PowerPoint had really changed how I teach. Now, thanks to a global pandemic, I'm changing the way I teach again. I'm working on getting a better lighting in here for my video cameras. If you notice, the audio is clearer this time because I was finally able to get a decent microphone stand. And I'm looking for more ways to make the class work and still give it a feel of a normal class. But if I was back in 1950s, we couldn't do any of this. They did originally try to do online classes, but instead of the internet, because it wasn't around then, they'd put lectures up on cable, and you would have to watch them and mail in your homework. The very way we're doing this is a good example of how technology changes pretty much everything. No doubt during the writing of your technology narrative, you're going to learn a lot about writing. My students always improve throughout the course of the semester to where the papers that they're writing in week 12 are much better than the papers they're writing in week 1. So going through all the writing, I expect you all to improve. Keep in mind, though, you can always revise any of these, so if you learn a lot doing the technology narrative that you wish you would have done in the profile, hey, you can go back and change the profile. Pretty cool, huh? See you in the next video.